Well, welcome everyone to your Enneagram Coach, the podcast. We are excited to have our podcast on YouTube, so I hope that you'll go over there, watch the video, like it, and subscribe to our channel. Well, today we have a very special guest, and we're going to continue our conversation about our new book called More Than Your Number, which is going to be released on Wednesday, September 20th, so real close. And we're going to talk in the book about EIP, or Enneagram Internal Profile. And today we get to do that with a wonderful Type 4, Dr. Russell Moore. So we're really excited to kind of dive in and to hear from Dr. Moore on what it's like to be a Type 4, but not just a Type 4, but how all of his EIP parts come together. So Jeff, can you just give us just a real quick, brief overview of EIP before we dive in?
Yeah, well, many of us have shared this idea of what's going on in our hearts, that there are many parts to us, and we're not just in one Enneagram type. So if you want to know about more EIP, you can go back to episode 112, where we explain the premise of our new book, More Than Your Number. But if you want to know explicitly about Type 4s, you can also listen to the episode 126, where we do a deep dive into the Type 4's EIP. But what is EIP? Well, have you ever said something like this? Part of me wants to do this. Or perhaps a spouse has said, wow, man, I really saw a different part of you in that situation. Mm-hmm. Or maybe with the Enneagram, you've always felt that you resonated with several numbers and rather than just one number and all the stereotypes that go on it. Well, EIP helps to capture these things about all the unique parts of how we show up in life. And to start, each type has 6 connecting parts. So there's our main type that has 2 parts. That is our wounded and beloved child. And then there are the connecting types. These are the 2 wings, the numbers that are adjacent to each Enneagram type, as well as the 2 paths. And so we'll talk through how those paths, although we've been taught that it's just healthy or unhealthy, that maybe it's a little bit more than that. Mm-hmm. Well, by using EIP, we become actually more aware of where our heart's at in relationship to the truth of the gospel. Are we trying to live independently apart from the cross? Or are our hearts in line with the truth of the gospel, the way that Paul speaks to Peter in Galatians, that actually there's a way in which we can lead our hearts back into relationship or back in alignment with the truth of the gospel through the work of the Holy Spirit, which will have its overflow not only in how we live out our sense of calling, but it'll also live out in our relationships with our family members and with those that we work with. So today we've got our special guest who's also an Enneagram Type 4. Russell Moore is a public theologian at Christianity Today and a director of Christianity Today's Public Theology Project. He's also the author of several books, including The Courage to Stand, Facing Your Fear Without Losing Your Soul, which sounds like it was written for a Type 6, and Onward, Engaging the Culture Without Losing the Gospel. He lives here in Nashville with his wife and his 5 sons, which on a side note, there was a moment where our kids went to school together.
Well, I thought that, but I don't think it was actually accurate.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Well, we thought...
I brought it up and I was like, oh, I think our kids got it wrong. So, but we lived in the same area.
That's right. Well, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad that you're here. And you've actually been a real gift to us, Dr. Moore, because you made a couple of short videos about the Enneagram when it was really, really popular. And I remember your sober-minded statement.
Yeah.
If you're too into personality tools, don't use it. And if you don't want to use it, don't use it. But I found it helpful.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about, when you heard about the Enneagram, how you found it, and then how you landed on being a Type 4.
Well, I don't really remember how I first started hearing about it, but I do know that it was helpful doing some of the testing to sort of figure this out. It was helpful for me, not so much in terms of my own number, but it was in terms of understanding other people. Because I would have people that I work with or that I love that would respond to things just very, very differently than I would. And it helped me to have a category for how to get that. And also in managing people, how to really tap into people's strengths.
Yeah.
And that was, this was more intuitive than it was intentional. but I had around me people with what I consider to be very complementary and different personality types. So
Mm-hmm.
for the last, I don't know, 15 years, the two closest people working with me were an 8 and a 3.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I would even before I really had a category to frame it, I would know there are certain things that would drive me crazy that are really
Yeah.
enlivening to one of them, and vice versa. And so
Yeah.
it just helped with that.
Absolutely.
That's fun. Now, it seems like were you intentionally looking for these, not necessarily these Enneagram types,
No.
but these types of people, or this providentially these were the people you hired for your team?
Well, a little bit of both. I I knew that there were certain gift sets that I didn't have,
Mm,
and that we could work together on. It was over time that I started to really see that it wasn't just a matter of gift set. It was
mhm,
also a matter of personality in ways that really helped me to sort of translate myself better and also to sort of understand. I mean, for instance, my close colleague who's a 3
mhm.
is probably the platonic ideal of threeness. He's someone who he sits
Uh-huh.
down every Sunday night and sort of maps out the schedule for his week,
Yep.
and when we would be facing some sort of decision, he would have a document that would have, here are all of the potential ways that we could go, and here are the pros and the cons of each of them. Well, that was and is really, really helpful to me.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had another, very close colleague who was an 8 who really, did not mind confrontation and didn't
Mhm.
mind drama, but in both these cases, they were very healthy. So
Yeah.
this was somebody who didn't mind confrontation, but he didn't love it, he didn't seek it out,
Sure.
wasn't enjoying it and harsh. So, that turned out to be really helpful.
Mhm.
Well, Bethany, why don't you start off with just giving us an overview of type 4?
Yeah, I think what I'll do is we'll do an overview of type 4, but also then add a little bit of the wounded and beloved child and kind of just dive into the whole 4 space there. Yeah, so type 4s primarily live in like imaginations and feelings deep down. They really have this idealized self that they envision themselves to be and want to be. And this idealized self is usually really creative, emotionally adept, and universally desired. And for them, they feel like they're kind of coming up short in some form or fashion. And so they tend to feel that there's something defective and flawed inside them, and they're longing and striving to gain this idealized self that's inside them. And so what they are usually doing is focusing on what is missing and what they're longing for. But again, but they feels they've already experienced somewhere and somehow this idealized self, and they're just really trying to get back to that place. That longing is there. But fours have so many amazing strengths. They have rich emotions, deep understanding of what they're feeling inside. They have great intuition. They're super creative. They know how to emotionally support others, especially when others are suffering. They can stay with that person for a very, very long time. Now, the core motivations are really what we always want to focus in on when we're looking at a type. So this is why they think, feel, and behave in particular ways. So for the type 4, we want to look at their core motivations, but then how the rest of their parts, their wings and their Enneagram paths also affect their main type. So for the type 4, their core fear is being inadequate, emotionally cut off, plain, mundane, defective, flawed, and insignificant. But they have the core desire of being unique, special, and their most authentic self. Now, they struggle with the core weakness of envy. And this is where they feel that there's something tragically flawed or missing inside them, but that others possess these qualities that they lack. Now, they have the core longing. What their heart longs to hear is you are seen and loved for exactly who you are, special and unique. Now, when we talk about the wounded child, we're talking about that part of our heart that is super vulnerable and tender. It's the part that was with us while we were children. And it had to deal with trauma and sin in the world, and it just did the best that it could to take care of who we were in that moment. And so for the type 4, they longed again to be seen for exactly who they were and loved for that unique self. And with those longings and feelings and passions that were deep down, a lot of times they felt very misunderstood. They actually felt disconnected from those around them because of that misunderstanding. They didn't really, at times, feel like they saw themselves mirrored in their parents, and so they couldn't quite understand, is there something wrong or flawed within me? And so they believed, well, I'm not sure if people are going to love, me if I mirror them, so I'm going to find this unique part of my heart and just show it to the world and let them see that part. But the wounded child often believes that they are too much or not enough. And this then starts this cascading of lots of deep feelings. We almost call it like a waterfall of emotions that feels like no one is going to understand the real depths of who I am. And it can feel very lonely. And so even as an adult, the type 4 longs to hear you are loved and seen for exactly who you are, special and unique. But what's the beautiful thing is when we move into the beloved part of the type 4, we'll see so many amazing characteristics come out because they know and believe and trust that they are fully satisfied in Christ, that Christ sees them fully. I mean, he created them and he loves what he creates. And so they feel this overflow of joy and satisfaction deep down. And they begin to know who they are and whose they are, that spirit-led self. That's the beloved part of their heart. And this feeling of shame starts to change into feeling like they belong. It's here where they're able to bring about the best of their emotions, bring out the best of their unique gifting and callings, and to literally bless the world in a new and creative space, a place that others really might struggle to actually go because it feels too big or too emotional, but they're actually able to go there with and lead people in that space. And so their beloved child part might say something like, I am not too much, nor am I less than others. God created me in such a beautiful way that I am part of a bigger story, a beautiful tapestry that he is weaving together. And because of him, I know and relish in the fact that I belong. So, Dr. Moore, I love just to hear, as we talk about the description of the type 4, both just in general, but also wounded and beloved, what parts resonate with you and why?
Well, that resonates with me, although I sometimes never feel as much of a 4 when I'm around friends who are also 4s, who seem to be more 4 than I am.
Yeah.
And
So
That's
are
funny.
they more emoting? Is that,
yeah. I mean,
So,
I don't think they're more emoting maybe inside, but they're
mhm.
definitely much more
Yes.
comfortable emoting on the outside. And
So here's,
maybe, you know, with
well,
with people who are, um, you have to be pretty close in
yes,
to really see the
that
sort
part.
of what's going on in terms
Yes.
of with me, but not with some friends of mine, which is, it's good,
Well,
but
and just to kind of let people know, and even for yourself, so there's a subset called instinctual subtypes, and there's 3 types for every type. And the counter type to the 4 probably is you, and this is the self-preservation 4, and they're called tenacity, and they actually experience all these same feelings internally, but they don't show them outwardly. Like you said, it takes someone that's really close to them for them to kind of reveal that. It's not that they're trying to hide it. They just are very tenacious and they're able to push through life, even though they have a lot of these feelings and internal ups and downs that are going on the inside. Whereas there's other subtypes of 4 that are very much showing what's happening on the inside. So I think that's really good that you said that, because your subtype, most likely, we haven't sat here and discussed it, but your subtype is the counter type, which means you don't quite look like the type 4 that we necessarily read about, but you're experiencing some of those same things internally. Does that sound right for you?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's true.
Good. So with the type 4, what parts really resonate? Like even with the wounded child and the beloved child, how do you see those 2 sides playing out in your life?
Well, part of it is the role of imagination. That's
Mm,
very important to me and always has been. It's one of the ways that I um, connect to health,
mm,
but it's also one of the ways that I can be unhealthy. I
mm,
can
mm,
live in the imagination, and particularly in terms of longing, the way that that shows up, I think, mostly for me, is in terms of nostalgia.
mm,
And one of the things, I have a friend who said to me one time, he said, part of one of your big flaws is that you have this nostalgic view where you almost go in the mirror image of bitterness and resentment.
mm,
I don't have a problem with bitterness and resentment, but it's not
mhm,
because of level of sanctification necessarily. It's just because what I tend to do is to remember all of the warm and
mm.
nostalgic things about any person or situation, and kind of have those in amber. And so I sort of have the imaginative reality back there. And I have to
Yes.
remind myself of what's really there. And,
Mhm.
and so that's something that perpetually comes up.
Yeah.
Dr. Moore, was that just part of how you related to family in order to stay connected with family? Was maybe overcoming a lot of difficulty and then remembering the good things about them?
I think it probably was, but maybe not so much with family as church family.
Mm.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I had in many ways a really, really good home church with
Mhm.
a lot of problems,
Mm,
but a really good home church to which I'm really appreciative, and saw some extraordinary things in some of the people there.
mm,
But it was also really disconcerting because I was in a Bible Belt culture that I could sort of see behind the curtain.
mhm,
And it was alarming to me as a child and as an adolescent, especially, and as a young
mhm,
adult, to see um, what often seemed to be play acting,
mm,
and not just play acting, but play acting that's covering up something dark.
Yeah.
mm.
And that
So
was
this has been
disturbing
a
to me.
particular gift for you for many years.
Yeah, and it's there was someone who's kind of worked with people, kind of a consultant guy who's worked with leaders for years and years and years, and he said, you have a superpower that's also a real problem, and that is
Yeah,
and that is that you can sort of intuitionally get a vibe
yeah.
on people pretty much immediately.
Mhm,
Yeah.
And, but what happens when you have that, and so there are all sorts of things where I will have this, and I can look back over my life, I'll have this gut intuition that says, "This is fake.
mhm,
This isn't
mhm.
real." And what I've noticed is, in almost every case, that turned out to be right.
Yeah.
But I would be saying that, I'm the only one who seems to be seeing this or noticing this, so it must just be me. And I would kind of
Mm.
over compensate for that in a lot of ways
Yeah.
that sometimes can lead to a kind of vertigo, because
Mm,
you're thinking, wait a minute, this situation that I'm in seems crazy or seems corrupt, but
mhm,
no one else seems to see it, and so maybe I'm just cynical.
mm,
And, then when I look back, I can say, well, my problem was not what I thought it was. I wasn't cynical. I
mm,
was the opposite of,
Mhm.
cynical. I was too I was not trusting. So when I look back over my life, I can see all sorts of times where my mind was wrong. And I
mm.
can see all sorts of times where my heart was wrong, but I can find very few times where my gut was wrong,
Interesting, yeah.
at least
Huh.
at first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, Dr. Moore, you've been walking through a very difficult season over the last few years in your relationship to the church in one sense. And it seems like, as I've seen your public writing on this, that there were some intuitional things that you were seeking to have conversation about, and yet were facing betrayal and cover up. I mean, what was that like for you to walk through that as a type 4?
Well, I think part of it is that I have friends and close colleagues who really do, and I'm not talking about sort of your quarrelsome kind of a uh, internet troll or something like that, but who are energized by conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, in the best possible ways. So it's sort of like conflict happens, it's call to arms. It's, there's something
Yeah.
enlivening about that for them. It's not the case for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's especially not the case when, a lot of what, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think a lot of people are facing this, but there's a sense of, um, building an identity around a particular people, a particular sort of tribe,
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing over a long period of time uh, what's actually there, and and
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
and uncovering. You start to realize some of the people that I respected and that taught me. Um, Didn't really believe, I won't say they didn't believe what they said they believed, because maybe they didn't believe what I thought they were telling me, what I
Uh-huh.
Mm.
thought they were
Sure.
teaching me. And so that's yeah, I'm just not the kind of person who really enjoys
Mm-hmm.
that sort of a situation. For instance,
Sure.
I have friends who really get a kick out of when they're sort of attacked on
Yeah.
social media, or a YouTube video or an internet or something like that. I never even see that stuff,
Yeah.
because I
Mm.
know it's not going to do for me what it does for them. What it does
Right.
for
Yeah.
them is to say, yeah, somebody's really hearing what I'm saying. I'm going to double down on it. That's not what motivates me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's interesting you say that because Beth, being the face of your Enneagram coach, sometimes comes under
I love
scrutiny.
it. I'm a type 9. I'm the peaceful accommodator.
Oh
I
no.
Oh, man.
do not want that. Yeah.
Yes,
I get
but
it.
there's a heart to want to win people, to want to make peace, to seek mutual understanding, but that becomes incredibly difficult. So that starts just the downward
Mm-hmm.
spiral of all the different feelings that are associated with
Well, I
it.
think this is a great segue to start to kind of unpack a little bit further EIP. So we talked about your main type being a type 4 and the wounded child and the beloved child. But if we unpack it a little further, there's 4 more connecting parts to your type 4. So the 2 wings on either side of your main type, so the 3 and the 5, play a significant role in your life, maybe at different times and at different amounts, but they do influence the type 4. That you don't become these types, but they influence. So let's just take a look at type 3 to begin with, and what it's like as a type 3 with their wounded child when it's following the wounded child or the beloved child. So the 3 is really looking for admiration, accomplishments, prestige. But under the leadership of the wounded child, they'll probably do it at all cost. They're willing to shapeshift. They're willing to make themselves look grand and competitive, better than they are. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to get that accomplishment, whatever that accomplishment is. Now, when the beloved child part of the heart comes in line, it helps the 4 in different ways. It's going to bring the ability to be the greatest cheerleader to others. Like, hey, we can do this. Let me show you how we can accomplish this. Let me come alongside you. They're also able to set out plans and resources to make things happen. But this can be actually a pretty tricky wing for the type 5 because the
And for the type 4.
the type 4, because the 3 is okay with not being authentic and shape-shifting to have a certain image, whereas the 4 is like, oh, no, 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 we are going to be authentic at all costs. And so when the two are kind of working together, it can be a little battle that is happening inside. And can feel very conflictual. So just kind of curious, how and when do you experience the 3 part of your heart showing up?
Well, I think in many ways. I mean, if I just look back at my life and sort of see what I was doing at different stages of life,
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a lot of threeness there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was running a congressional campaign communications office at 19, and so
Wow.
that's sort of it's just weird. But
That's
but that
amazing.
but that sort of thing definitely does. But also because the conflict that you're talking about, one of the things that has always been most difficult for me emotionally
Mm-hmm.
is when someone will ask me to be inauthentic as a strategy. So
Mm-hmm.
there would be something, for instance, um, that might be controversial, and someone would say, "Well, why don't you just apologize for that to end the controversy?" And I would
Mm-hmm.
say, "Well, I don't mind apologizing, I apologize all the time, but I can't apologize for that because if I say I'm sorry for saying that, I'm lying,
Right. Right.
and yeah, but it'll make this particular problem go away." And I
Mm-hmm.
have great difficulty understanding that, and so the very fact of contemplating that was always very difficult for me. And there's a lot of that that tends to go on in my world
Mm-hmm.
in evangelical Christianity, which is to say, um, let's just find what people want us to say and
Right.
say that so that we can move on to the next thing and maybe achieve the next I don't know rung on the
Yeah.
ladder
Mm-hmm.
of so forth. And I can't do that. I mean, that's almost
Mhm.
physically painful. I
Mm-hmm.
would much rather be out of ministry and
Mm-hmm.
unemployed than I would to see myself or to have my children see me as a
Mm-hmm.
hack, as someone.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because it was so alarming to see some of the things that I saw as a
Yeah.
kid and to think, if that's the case, what if that's all this is?
Yeah.
And if all this
Absolutely.
is just sort of a way for people to get political power or to uh, satisfy their sexual appetites or to
Mm-hmm.
make money or to maintain their ethnic identity or whatever it is, then what that means is that Jesus isn't there,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
Jesus being there I know it sounds obvious, but is a big deal for me. And so
Yeah.
it was. It's almost. It's looking through all of that. I can almost see a Darwinian, meaningless, violent universe
Mm.
um, that I don't that I don't believe exists and I don't want to exist.
And I think that's such a beautiful representation of a 4 because the 4s are able, and especially the subtype that you have, tenacity, is no, we must be authentic and real, all of us, and we must lay down the truth and deal with the hard emotions or deal with the hard situations that are at hand. And though I don't want to sign up for that, I'm willing to do it for the betterment of my own self, but also for others. And the 4s can live in that hard space. Not that, again, that they want to choose it, but they can live in it. Whereas other people are like, I'm out,
Mhm.
or that's too hard, or why don't we just make it look better? So I really just admire that integrity and the tenacity that it takes to do that. Well, let's dive into type 5. So it's the other wing. And so 5s are really kind of the observers in life, the innovators. They're curious, they're craving to learn more. They fear that they're going to not have enough resources inside, and it's going to lead to catastrophic depletion. So you'll find when the wounded part of the type 5 comes in line, they're going to become fiercely independent and kind of put up some strong boundaries to protect that inner reserve, to make sure that no one's invading it too much. And then they're going to feel that they need to sort out their emotions and their intellect in that time of privacy and to really kind of process what's going on. And they believe that their thoughts and emotions are truth. And so they want to lead through that truth, even if it might be false. And so the 5 really gets kind of tenacious in that. But when the beloved child comes in line, they're going to combine both intellectual insights and emotional intuition, which is going to produce stunning original works that really blesses others. And I really feel like that's kind of what I'm hearing, from you, is that you're connecting both the intellectual knowledge that you've gained over the years, but also the pursuit for authenticity and emotional depthness to bring and bless others. So just kind of, naming the 5 part just a little bit, what really stands out the most for you?
Well, one of the things is that it's very difficult for me in seasons of my life where I'm being overly scheduled in a
Mm,
way that I can't process and work through things. But it's also really difficult when I go to the other extreme of that.
mm,
Because for me, anyway, the way that I find out what's going on is by writing. And so
mm-hmm.
I will write
Wow.
things, and I don't even know that that's what I'm thinking. That's how I process things. So I need a certain degree of withdrawal to be able to
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
do that. I also need. It doesn't work though when I find myself just sort of waiting for inspiration to strike in a way in which
Mm-hmm.
I feel a certain way and therefore I write. Instead, it has to work the other way. I have to write, and then that's sort of bringing
Interesting.
out
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
those things, and that's a key part of everything that I do is trying to balance the both and of
Mm-hmm.
the imagination and the intellect, of intuition and wisdom seeking and those sorts of things. But
Mm-hmm.
that requires a key balance in and of itself
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
doing that. So I can be really, if I am, if someone is, there are times when I have been really frustrated with myself or with my team at various times where I remember saying once to my wife, "They think I'm a robot." That,
Mm.
I just could, and it wasn't them,
Sure.
Right. Right.
thinking that. These were all things that I had agreed to at the time, but I was realizing I can't be, constantly scheduled and do the stuff that I'm
Yeah.
expected to do, because what I do really does require um, a certain exploration of all of that in order to
Yes.
find it. But it's also true that if I overcorrect for that,
Mm.
then I'm going to be disconnected in such a way that I no longer am in touch with the imagination,
Mm.
because a lot of what a lot of what the creative stuff comes out of are
Mm-hmm.
out of conversations and engagements and so forth that then there's time to reflect on,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then and so if I have too much of one or the other,
Mm-hmm.
it ends up not being good.
Yeah.
That's great because that is characteristic of fiveness
Yeah.
is balancing between the two, being curious about life. I've heard five say like I can talk with anyone about anything, And at the same time, they can be looking for opportunities to get out of the conversation.
Yeah.
They want to be engaged in learning, and then at times they'd rather be with a book.
Yeah.
And so, but that makes, and I loved hearing the idea that there's waiting for the moment of how to engage. Fives can be very measured about when they're prepared to speak in a moment, to deliver a message, and being prepared for that moment. And part of that is just the daily writing and journaling and getting pen to paper.
Yeah.
And that's why I often, I'm often most effective when I find ways to subvert myself ahead of time. And one of those has to do with the overscheduling. One of my colleagues said one time, I used to do this for a while until I figured out what he was doing. He would have some speaking event or some engagement, and he would say, "This is happening next week. Would you want to do it?" And I would say, "No." And then he would say, "It's not really happening next week. It's happening a year from now. But if you're not at least interested in doing it next week, then you won't be a year from now, and I'm going to help you to not do that." But on the other hand, I started a weekly newsletter largely because I knew that if people were expecting every Thursday to get this, that would put the kind of pressure on me uh, to do it
Yes.
in a way. And that was, it was really just sort of looking ahead and saying, I know what you're going to
Yeah.
try to do,
Yeah.
and I want to restrain you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, let's jump kind of almost to the opposite kind of personality, which is connected to the 4, which is the 2. So we just talked about the 5, that is more isolated, but then the 4 is connected to 2, and we're now getting into the Enneagram paths. The 2 types are connected by lines to the 4. And the type 2 is very relational. They want relationships and friendliness. They want to know how people are doing and very generous with their time and talents. Now, the wounded part of the type 2 is going to feel the need to be needed, and they're going to create dependencies from others. So now, this can look different in different people's seasons of life and, what they are doing in life. But it could be dependencies on being needed for help or their abilities or what they can offer the world. And if others aren't kind of asking for that, they might tend to manipulate the situation so that others do feel, oh, wait, I do need you. And then the other thing is there's this push and pull with 4s is they kind of idealize relationships from afar, like, oh, this is going to be the greatest relationship. And then they kind of go after it. And then the person gets closer and like, wait a second, you got some warts and you're not quite what I thought. And so they kind of push. So it's this push-pull mentality. And the pull is the 2. The 2 is like, I've got to have relationships. And the push can be the 4 of like, I'm not sure, that's a bit much. But the beautiful, healthy part of the 2 is when the 4 begins to recognize that not only do they have their own needs and taking care of their own needs, but they're seeing the needs of others, and they're able to generously give all that they have from God and literally bestow it upon others without strings attached. So they don't need anything in return. They don't need to be needed. They're able just to give out of this overflow of their heart because they feel filled up by Christ and what He has given. And so this generosity, this compassion, this love just freely flows, which also benefits the 4's emotions and recharges them in ways that they haven't really experienced before. So what is the type 2? How does that land on you, the wounded and the beloved parts?
Well, my wife is a 2,
Uh-huh.
and I have seen her recovering from surgery, getting up and taking a meal to somebody because they were recovering from surgery. And I would say this makes no sense,
Yes.
and she wouldn't even understand why that doesn't make sense.
Right.
But yeah, I think that there is I think that her need to be needed and mine are different
Right.
in that she, I think, needs to be needed much more in kind of practical
Mm-hmm.
ways of showing love. I think the way I need to be needed is in terms of I don't know. I remember there was a secular journalist who said to me one time because there had been several things that were happening at that time in my denomination where I would kind of go in and fix things,
Mm-hmm.
kind of behind the scenes in order to keep something terrible from happening. And he just said, "Well, how many times are you going to do this?"
Wow.
And I think part of that was just normal, let's we have to fix bad things from happening, and part of
Mm.
that probably was, this is how I belong, is
Yeah.
that I'm going to serve you um, by getting rid of, by helping bad things to go
Mm.
away, or helping you to make better decisions that you're not gonna regret later or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you experience it whenever, because I have seen and noticed your heart in seeking to help the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is a tremendous burden and vision that you are striving for and want to be part of the solution. What is it like for you whenever maybe that help or assistance is not accepted
Mm.
or not valued?
Well, I mean, sometimes I think what happens is a revealing of ways that, um I mean, I think one of the things that we're all experiencing over the past several years is sort of a pulling back and seeing what's really there.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what I have seen is that some people or some institutions that I had idealized were not what they seemed to be.
Mm.
And what I can see looking back is that I should have known that,
Mm.
and that there was a part of me that did know that, but that in many cases I was kind of trying to help people live up to an ideal
Mm-hmm.
that maybe I had for them, that I needed them to be, that's not really who they were.
Mm.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that case, I think there's a moral component to that, in
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
which, one really does have to pay attention to the fact that there can be there can be a kind of loyalty
Mm-hmm.
that imputes integrity in places where it's not there,
Right.
Right.
and helps to work to make it seem like it's there
Mm.
Yeah.
because
Well,
you need it to be, and
I can
that's
certainly
not.
feel the tension. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that intuitive sense that something's not right,
Yeah.
but the desire to be loyal to the image, this glittering image that maybe we've bought
Mm.
into,
Mhm.
but then wanting to be of help in the restoration of it. I
Mm.
mean, that's a lot. That's the full gamut.
Yeah. Well, I think that gets us to the last part of the type 4, which is the type 1. And I hear a lot of type 1 in you, which is beautiful because type 1s are sensible and ethical. They're responsible. They're serious and self-disciplined. They really feel personally obligated to improve and reform the world. And they bring a sense of balance to the emotions of the type 4. But when led by the wounded part of the heart of the type 4, this is where they can really start to focus on flaws, become judgmental, critical of others in the world for not being perfect. And they can get very frustrated and disappointed. And they can kind of show it through their body language by being maybe impatient or prickly, and also can be very controlling, seeing what's imperfect and just really honing in. But when the beloved child is at the helm, they're going to be more emotionally balanced. It doesn't mean removing emotions, but they're balanced, they're objective, they're grounded, and they're able to look at the mundane tasks they usually don't want to do. And fours are able to steward their time and be responsible and disciplined and organized. And by doing that, they're able to then forge a path forward for the greater good of others with the emotions they have, but also the ethics that they want to see accomplished. And I hear a lot of that through your story and would just love for you to expound more on how the type 1 part of your heart really comes to the forefront in a lot of instances and assists your type 4.
Well, I mean, I think one example of that would be I've spent a lot of my life working in areas of orphan care, um, and sort of calling people within the church to be involved in foster care system, to
Mm,
when they're called to adopt, to help people who are adopting, and those sorts of things. But like almost everything else, that came out of um, grappling with a flaw in me.
mm,
So,
mm,
I mean, I was when my wife had a burden to adopt, I said, "Well, I'm all for that, but let's wait until we have it." And the words that I used were, "Let's wait until we have children of our own first."
mm,
And so in that process, what started to happen is I realized, what are the assumptions that I have
mm.
about the realness of biological children that doesn't apply to children who are adopted, and how does that line up
Sure.
with scripture? And it didn't line up. So
Mm,
I had to work myself through that, and then worked to try to help other people who might be in the same situation through it. In the same way,
that
what
is
I'm working on
beautiful.
mostly now is I realize I'm trying to talk to people who are in the situation I was in at 15,
Hmm.
where I had to work myself through that, and to help work them through that too.
Yeah,
And
because
to
you just submitted a manuscript, which I think
yeah.
is really. I said earlier, I was like, can I get my hands on that tomorrow or today? Actually,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
and it
a lot of that has to do with the fact that I can see the sort of counterfactuals of 15-year-old Russell Moore that could have gone in a very, very different direction
sure.
if it hadn't been for just certain influences that were there at just the right time.
Mm,
And so that's a lot of it. But there also has to be a a sense of calibrating impatience without giving up and just sort of yielding
yes,
to despair. And so
right.
I'll be talking about that, really talking to myself.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Sure.
when I'm talking to people, for instance, with orphan care, there would be people who would say, "I'm so frustrated because we've got all of these foster care kids in our community, and our church isn't doing anything." And I have to come in and say, "Well, it
Mhm.
might be that your pastor's overwhelmed." And when you're saying, "Why aren't we doing anything?" what he's hearing is, "Why aren't you doing anything?"
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
maybe instead, let's take these small steps where you can say, "Here's what I can do. Will you bless that?"
Mm.
And then you'll be able to see sometimes a change of heart happen as things go on. But that's really just coming out of the fact that I often have to sort of talk myself into, don't give a contrast between the ideal and nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, Dr. Moore, we are so grateful that
Mhm.
you spent some time with us talking about your Enneagram type. There's so many things that you speak to, and to see this personal side of you and how you've lived out your sense of calling with your family,
Mhm.
with your work, and yeah, how you've lived out your faith has been such a gift
Mhm.
to us and to our listeners. We're so grateful for your time.
And
Well,
where can
thank
people
you.
find you?
Christianity Today is
Mhm.
where I serve, or just at russellmoore.com.
Great. Yeah. And you've got tons of incredible books and resources, and then this other book that's coming out. What year is it coming out? Even though
It'll
you
be in
just
the spring. Yeah.
okay. Okay,
Oh,
good. Not too
wow. Yeah,
long.
that's
Yes.
great.
Sometimes when you hand a manuscript, it can be a long
Yeah.
time coming. So
Yeah,
yes,
that'll
awesome.
be timely. Well,
Well,
fantastic.
thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, friends, if you found this conversation helpful with Dr. Russell Moore and talking about type 4s, be sure to share this episode with the type 4s in your life. And we'd love for you to personally experience this, where you can connect with one of our certified Enneagram coaches by finding a coach that fits you best at myenneagramcoach.com. We got a directory of coaches all over the world that are ready to help you. And please pre-order our book, More Than Your Number, which releases very, very soon.
It's right there.
In fact, get one for your friend that you know would love this Enneagram content that makes the Enneagram so easily accessible and personal for personal growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a game changer in the Enneagram space. So I can't wait for you guys to get a hold of that. But make sure that you join us next week where we have the privilege of interviewing one of my all-time favorite musicians and fellow Type 9, Ryan O'Neill, also known.
I mean, you just put Ryan in the context of Nora Jones.
Yep.
Jack Johnson.
Yep. Amos Lee.
Toad Wet Sprocket.
Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Man.
Dude,
Ryan, good for you, bro.
Wow, no. I mean, I literally listen to Ryan's music on a daily basis.
Sure.
Like when I'm working, that is what I'm listening to. It's Ryan O'Neill.
That's true. I forgot about
Which is actually Sleeping at Last. That's what he goes by. So anyway, he has done a masterful job creating one song for all 9 types. So if you have not heard those songs, you must go listen to his songs. Just type in Sleeping at Last Enneagram and you'll see his Enneagram songs. And when you listen to yours, you might want to be alone and have a couple of Kleenexes on hand because they are so masterfully well done. But I can't wait to talk with Ryan next week and just to kind of hear about his journey with the Enneagram as well. And as always, please remember that the Enneagram reveals your need for Jesus, not your need to work harder. It is the gospel that transforms us. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for joining us.